Hello and welcome to the Lund University International Podcast. On the show, you'll hear from current students, alumni, teachers, and many more special guests as we explore what it's really like to live and study in Lund. My name is Rebecca, and I am a regional recruitment coordinator. Today, we are going to be talking about living outside of Lund. So this is for anybody who's thinking about where they can live, whether they want to live in Lund itself, or maybe what are the other options. So we're going to be talking to a lovely guest on this topic. So can I please ask you to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Julia. I'm an international student from Germany. I moved to Sweden about 3.5 years ago to do my bachelor's, finished that one last year, and then moved from Lund to Malmö for the start of my master's and have been there since.
Brilliant. And what program were you studying?
Currently I'm doing my master's in economic demography at the Department of Economics.
Wonderful, that's great. So I guess the main question is at the moment, where are you living?
Well, as hinted, I live in Malmö.
Yeah.
I live quite central there. I moved there this summer, so it has been a solid half year, so I feel confident about telling a little bit about my experience. But maybe to tell why I moved to Malmö is because I've lived in Lund for 3 years, and who knows Lund knows it's small, very nice, but small. So I thought it would be time for a change, at least personally, and hence I moved to a little bit of a bigger city for everyone. Malmö has like 300,000 inhabitants, so it's about 3 times the size of Lund, just for perspectives.
Yeah, that's really helpful because I'm sure that there'll be people listening who maybe come from really huge cities or maybe really tiny ones, so it's nice to kind of give a sense for the size of Lund and Malmö. So previously you lived in Lund, and was that in like traditional student accommodation?
Yes, I moved to a corridor for my first year. It was a little bit outside of Lund, so a little bit in the countryside, but nonetheless part of Lund.
Yeah.
It was a relatively big corridor. It was during COVID, but it was a really nice experience. I got to know a lot of people. And then after 2 years, I moved to another corridor, more centrally in Lund, and that was a little bit of a smaller corridor.
Mm-hmm. And then now, who do you live with? Do you live with other people? Do you have your own flat or...
I moved in with my partner this summer.
Okay.
He finished his degree, so he's working in Copenhagen, and hence we decided just to change it up, but also for the commute. Malmö is a good middle ground in that sense. So we're living together, only us two, in an apartment.
How's that?
Yeah, honestly, it's going good so far.
Cool.
Yeah, we're very lucky in the apartment hunt, so that is good. And it's a little bit more of the big city life, getting out of the student town. So far, so good.
That's really nice. Yeah, I was going to mention this as well, that when I was studying here, because I'm also an alumni of Lund University, and I studied the Masters in Applied Cultural Analysis, and I also lived outside of Lund. I was living in a town called Hässleholm, which is somewhat to the north, quite far. Most students don't live there, but the reason I was living there was because of my partner. So I do think that this is often the case, actually, that sometimes people are choosing to look in Malmö, for example, because maybe they're bringing family and they need some accommodation which is more suitable for their family, and that there are just a bit more options in Malmö than in Lund. Because I think when you're looking in Lund, I don't know if you looked for apartments with your partner in Lund at all, but it's not that much choice really for those like who are maybe having certain requirements, like they might have pets or kids, I suppose.
I absolutely agree. I mean, for me, Lund is very synonymous to student housing. I mean, in the best way possible. We very briefly considered Lund close to the central station, but then we were like, I think the options are bigger in Malmö. And it's more an apartment market, whereas here it's more of a student corridor market in the best way possible. Again, but like
exactly. I guess it just depends a little bit what you're looking for. And that's one of the things we're going to be kind of talking about now, is like how to make that decision and what kinds of things you get as options when you look elsewhere. So I guess one question that we should also cover, because lots of people ask this as well, is how is the transportation situation and how is the commute? Because I think one of the questions that lots of people are concerned about is how far away everything is. Like, even when they're looking for accommodation here in Lund, they're worried about like how long it will take them to reach the campus. So maybe you can kind of compare a little bit now that you've done both. Is it a lot more like time, or?
Honestly, I think It's a lot better than I expected, let's put it like this. I mean, Lund is a very bike-friendly city where everything is quite close. Because in my first student corridor, it was a bit further away. I was used to commuting a bit more on bike, which is not great if it's raining. And then I moved more to the city center, but overall people start complaining if they have to get from A to B in more than 15 minutes.
Right.
But overall, I didn't spend so much time in Malmö in my bachelor because I always thought, oh, it's so far away. But then once I moved there, I mean, we moved quite centrally, so we're close to bus stations and also a big train station, so that's very nice. And then door to university campus, my campus is a little bit more in the north, so not super in the center like the social sciences. And it takes about 45 minutes on a good day. So I think that's pretty good and realistic. Of course, it's not there in 10 minutes, but it worked good so far, except for the occasional train delays or something, but then you can switch on the bus. So there's also like options how you can commute. So honestly, I think it's quite good, but you can of course tell when there is a spontaneous activity in the evening and you want to get to Lund and you're like, oh, now I gotta take the bus.
Right, that's probably something that people should maybe consider when they're thinking about living outside of Lund, is that a lot of the student activity is obviously happening here, right? So did you find that this past few months has been different in that regard? Like, have you still been able to take part in things with your classmates or your other friends here, or what kind of factors do you have to think about now when you're socializing?
I think it's definitely still very much possible to take part in social life. And as you said, it is primarily in Lund, so there's not that much student life for Lund students, at least going on in Malmö.
Yeah.
So you have to factor that in, as I mentioned earlier. If it's spontaneous, it's a little bit of an effort sometimes, but generally most days I have lectures, so I'll be in uni anyway. So if I know there's an evening activity, and thankfully evening activities start not too late in Sweden, then I usually stay there.
Yeah.
So that works really, really well. Otherwise, a lot of things are pre-planned. Like if you go to sittings or to a bar, you agree a couple of days in advance. So as long as I know and can plan for it, it's really fine. But you have to factor it in. So especially in the novice week, so the first weeks of university where there's a lot of introduction stuff, it might be a bit exhausting to commute back and forth, I gotta say. But the second this is over, I think it's really doable and fine and even nice in some sense. Yeah,
and just for anyone who doesn't know, what's a sittning? Because you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, a sittning is basically usually 3 or 4 course dinner where students usually cook for students, you sing songs, you play some games, do some improv theater. It's very Swedish. You can either have a theme sittning, so wear very fancy and nice clothes, or a fun costume theme. So it's very common and happens every week, though I don't go that often.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. I also, when I was studying, I didn't really have so much interest in the student life personally, because I was a little bit older and I was kind of not really going to these events. So for me, it really wasn't that much of a problem to be outside of Lund, because it wasn't something that I was super interested in personally. And I still could take part in specific activities. Every week I would go to choir, for example, on a Wednesday night, and then I would just get the train home afterwards, and I would be home 10:30 at night. So it was a bit late, but it was doable,
I think that is definitely something also to keep in mind. I would say in my bachelor I did a lot more. I was active in a student association, which was very fun, and I still do the occasional thing, but it has gotten less, I would say, already before I moved to Malmö. So right now, I like Malmö that it kind of separates the student life and my home life a little bit too, which can be nice. So it depends a lot on what you're out for. If you're the big party animal who likes to go to a lot of sittings, then maybe living in Lund the first year is great. And then you can still always consider moving. I think that's also a factor to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's really true. I think that a lot of people do that, don't they? They start in Lund so that they get the traditional student experience. And then after a while, they think, okay, maybe I'm a bit sick of corridor life now. Maybe I want my own space, or, whatever it is. And then the options are more if you look a little bit further afield as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I mean, it goes one way. You can move from Lund to Malmö, but it's also always possible to start out in Malmö or Helsingborg or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe because you find housing, maybe because there is a benefit to it right now, but you can always move. So I think that's good to keep in mind. You're not bound to one place when you pick it.
Don't worry if you're listening and you're like, oh no, I have to choose. You can choose and then you can change your mind. So that's okay. That's really cool. And yeah, it's definitely a good idea, I think, for people to kind of just consider their own needs and what they most need from student life, because it will be different depending on maybe what stage of life you're at, or you know, whether you're living with a partner or whether you're here like trying to meet new friends and people and things like that. So I guess this is all really good stuff to keep in mind. I wonder whether you might be able to speak a little bit about the kinds of housing options that exist outside of Lund for international students and how they would actually find that accommodation, because we've obviously talked about your experience. You're living in a flat with your partner, but there are more options, aren't there? So maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Generally, yes. I would say Malmö specifically is a lot more accommodation-wise focused on apartments or also collectives. I know a lot of friends who live in relatively big houses, 5-6 people, so that's cool too. But it's not as much the traditional student corridor, though I'm pretty certain they have some too, because they have Malmö University, so there's students there too. I just don't know how that's limited to the university itself. But it's a little bit more apartment focused, if you want an apartment to share it with some friends or move together in a house. So that's my idea. And for finding it, we personally found it over Facebook groups. And I think this is really, really common in Sweden. This is also common if you look for an apartment in Lund. And there you usually can check what is out there. Do people offer something? But of course, you also have to be like really careful not to be scammed.
That's true. Maybe we can talk about that a little as well, like about how to avoid being scammed, because that's another question that some students have. But so Facebook is one thing. We can maybe come back to that as well. Do you know of any other like good sources of house hunting?
I know that you can always find something on Bopoolen. That's like a housing slash sales platform. So you can look for places there. There is also, of course, housing agency. So the rental market in Sweden works that you put yourself in a queue, and the longer you queue, the better are your chances. But that's very much connected to having a Swedish personal number and have like income that you can prove that you have, or maybe CSN, so the Swedish student loan. So I think that aspect adds a lot of bureaucratical hurdles.
Maybe a bit less accessible for international students, And especially if you're only here for 1 or 2 years, you wouldn't really have that long to be in the queue. So but still maybe worth it for those who are thinking about longer.
Absolutely. Then you have also more secure long-term housing. You have a first-hand contract and stuff. So that is very, very nice too.
And I've heard quite a lot of people also post on Blocket and like advertise, or even on Facebook as well, and advertise themselves. So rather than like finding a place and then applying, they actually present themselves as like, I'm looking for an apartment. And I don't know how successful that is, but I feel it's successful.
That's how we got it, honestly, our apartment. We were contacted by our current landlord. Like, we're subletting, so it's a second-hand contract. But my partner posted a post, hey, this is my background. I'm going to work in Copenhagen. My girlfriend is going to study in Malmö, so this and that. And then we actually were contacted. Of course, there's also, again, scammers there, but generally that was quite successful. So I think that works a lot better often. And I also know of friends who rented out rooms in Lund personally, that they rather contacted people that put themselves out there rather than publishing their room, because then you get 20,000 messages and have to go through it. So I think that's a really good way to get out there.
Know. And it might also be helpful for those who are listening who are EU nationals who don't have the access to the housing through LU accommodation.
Exactly.
So that's another thing to note, like just as a general tip, I think. But okay, let's talk about scams then, because I feel like that is something that we should mention.
It is.
So when you're not going through the sort of formal system with LU accommodation, then of course there is a little bit more of a risk that you could be taken advantage of by somebody who is actually not advertising a real place, for example. So do you like have any advice or tips on the common things to look out for there, or stuff that you kind of experienced yourself, perhaps, that kind of thing?
I mean, generally, I would say go with your gut feeling. If something feels off, either try to get more confirmation or just try to find something else. Of course, if you're just overcautious, then maybe double check, get some extra information. If you have the benefit of being in Sweden, it's, of course, the most important, best thing to go to the apartment directly, meet whoever is renting it out.
Yes, exactly.
You should be able to ask for the personnummer of the apartment house. There is a Swedish social security number that everyone has, and you can look up people over that, see where they're registered, if they're registered in that apartment or at least in the city, or if it matches their background story. So do a little bit of research. I think that's always good. Check their socials and stuff, whatever is available. And if you're not in Sweden, because that's the case for a lot of times, I mean, I went on exchange last year and had to try to find housing in Canada, so that was intense. I also found it over Facebook, so you just gotta ask for maybe a video house tour, or maybe also how it looks from outside, cross-check the address with how it looks on Google Maps and so on. And then, I mean, at some point, you just gotta trust it, but try to double check everything. Trust your gut.
Yeah, I think I've heard that like one thing to look out for is if somebody says, I'm not actually in Lund or Malmö, so I can't go and show you round. Like that's a red flag. Like that should be something that you note, because like if they're not actually here, and they're saying like, oh, it's my partner's apartment or something and it's not mine and I'm actually really far away, then how are you going to verify that it's real? So that's a problem, I would say, or like something to note and be very careful about. And as you said, just being really like careful about verifying everything. Great tips, I would say, to just be very thoughtful, and definitely don't send some money until you've like actually verified things as best you can and seen a video, or maybe if you even have someone local who can go and look, like that would be another great way. That's a good tip. If you know someone in Sweden, ask them if they can pop by or confirm it. That helps a lot of times. The local knowledge adds a lot. Like if you're in the area yourself, it's a lot easier to confirm than from abroad. But only try to get your contract fixed and everything, and don't send unreasonable amounts of money in advance. Of course, there's always, to some extent, you usually need to pay rent in advance, and also a deposit. The deposit usually varies from half rent to rent in advance. So there is this aspect, but think if it's reasonable, think it's realistic. Have you seen a video tour and stuff like this? And if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Like if it's way lower than the normal market area, like rent, then it's probably not real. Okay, great. I think that's good because, you know, for those who are looking outside of Lund, these are more things to consider, even more than others perhaps. And I just want to ask another thing about Malmö, really, because I think maybe we can sketch out a little bit what it's like. So for those who are thinking about living in Malmö, I mean, we can't really do that so much with, for example, Helsingborg or other places, because we don't have anybody here who lived there. Yeah. But at least for Malmö, which is a very popular choice, maybe you can just say a little bit about the kind of atmosphere, what kinds of social things you can do there, you know, what you enjoy about it, or what's difficult, you know, whatever you want to really say, just to give people a little picture.
Yeah, so to start with, I said Malmö has like 300,000 inhabitants, so I would say coming from a city with like 1.5 million inhabitants, it's a city. It's not the biggest, but you definitely have the city vibe there. It's at the seaside, so that is an aspect I really enjoy because despite Lund being only about 11 kilometers away from the seaside, you'll never go to the beach except like twice in the summer, honestly. So I appreciate that a lot. A lot is centered around the city center, which is relatively small, and then there's a lot of housing areas around. It's a very diverse city in the very best way. You get a lot of cultures and experiences. It has a lot of culture too, like there's a lot of museums, cinemas, concerts. So I think that's a thing I really like. Lund has a lot of culture too. It's great, especially with the student life. But Malmö is like another notch. Lots of arts museum and stuff. So there's a lot to explore, which I personally really enjoy. A lot of restaurants where you can spend your money.
That's maybe my favourite thing about Malmö, to be honest, is the food.
I agree.
The food is just so good, and you just have so many options.
Yeah.
which is really nice. I mean, you do get a surprising amount of options in Lund, but like Malmö is obviously on another level. And as you said, because it's diverse city, you've got all sorts of different cuisines, restaurants, and also supermarkets as well, with lots of different kinds of ingredients. So that's nice.
The supermarkets are in a way definitely an upgrade. The offer in Lund is a bit limited.
Yeah.
So I like that you can kind of pick to which market you want to go, which price range. You can do that in Lund too, but you have to take into account that you might take another 20 minutes to get there or something. Lots of smaller Asian supermarkets or specialty supermarkets, different price ranges. I know there's ICA, it's like a supermarket brand, and they have one near Mellevanstorget, which is also quite central. And they have a great vegetarian vegan selection, much bigger than anywhere else for some reason. But that just shows
probably because of demand.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that's really cool. Okay. Wonderful. I think we've kind of covered some of the hot topics to do with living outside of Lund. But would you have any other advice, tips, or information that you think is important to share for those who are thinking about living outside of Lund?
Yeah, I mean, kind of summing up the previous points in a way, think about what you want. Do you want a bigger city like Malmö? Do you want a smaller city that has more focus on the student life like Lund? Are you moving here with a partner, with a family, or are you alone and maybe rather looking for a social student corridor? And then just also try to see where you can find places, because I think that's also a relevant factor. Yeah. Sometimes that's limiting. And exactly, don't feel too bad about making a decision. You can always still move. That is actually quite easily once you're settled, I would say, and once you're in the system and know how everything works.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good kind of final tip to basically not worry too much about this and take the options that are available to you when you get them. Because as we said, it can be like a situation where you have to search a little for this.
Yeah.
So if something comes up and it looks good, you can move, and then you can always make a new choice later. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Julia, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully everybody who's listening now has a lot more information about where they want to live.
Yeah.
So thanks again.
Good luck with the housing search.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Lund University International Podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Lund University, you can go to our website, lunduniversity.lu.se. You can also follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and X, and you can chat with current students on Unibuddy. Don't forget to subscribe, and we look forward to bringing you a new episode very soon.